All right, in this video, we're going to draw Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers from 1889. So we're going to use watercolor for this as well. First thing I want to do, we're going to make a border around this painting. And so at the 1/2 inch mark, I'm going to make a dash. So I'm going to do this all the way around. Just at that middle line where we have the 1 inch mark, just make a dash. So we will have a total of 8 of these marks. So we'll have 2 on each side. So that'll give us a very nice clean border. It'll also help us line up our painter's tape or masking tape. Last mark. And then I'm just going to use my ruler and connect the lines. And one last pair. All right, so that gives us that border around the paper. And this painting, as you can see in the Google slideshow, it's going to be horizontal or vertical. So we're going to go up and down. I have my painter's tape. Enough to line it up on the bottom. So just line it up with those pencil marks that we placed. And whenever you set the tape, make sure you press pretty firmly where the tape is touching the paper. That way it ensures that the tape is going to create a nice waterproof seal. Hold the tape fairly taut. And this also allows us to press our paper on the desktop also. One last side. All right, got my tape all the way around my paper. So with this drawing, we're going to keep it fairly loose, meaning we're not going to try and get every single line perfect and matching toward the Van Gogh painting. So as you're drawing and sketching, what'll really help you achieve this effect? So, I mean, there's really no just perfectly straight lines in this painting. If you hold your pencil and like, if you have a longer pencil, if you hold it near, the middle, or if your pencil's a little bit shorter, hold it near the end. That'll really kind of keep you in that sketching mode. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to sketch what will be the table line, as you can see in the painting on the screen. So just estimate about 1/5 of the way up the paper, maybe about an inch or so. I'm going to start, I'm just going to sketch a line going across, and it's going to have a little bit of a tilt or angle to it. So it's not going to be perfectly horizontal across the paper. It is going to have a bit of a dip to the line. And the next thing I am touch up a little sketch mark real fast. So the next thing I'm going to do is, we'll zoom in just a little bit. So for the next step, I'm going to draw the vase or flower pot. So right in the middle, I'm going to start with a curved line. And then I'm just going to allow this to kind of curve up and over. Have this rounded effect to it. And what's going to happen with this drawing is we aren't going to see the top of this just because there are going to be so many flowers. It's really going to cover it up quite a bit. Now, just above this table line, I'm going to sketch a line that curves and dips down. And so the purpose of this line is, you can see in the photo, there's just two different colors on the flower pot. Then we don't need this table line going through our flower pot anymore. I'll just take that out real quick. And we're going to start with the flowers. So there are a lot of these giant seed pods. And so just to really start off the bat, I'm going to draw the first one. So it's going to be a rounded shape. We're not going to make this perfect by any means, though. So it's not going to be a perfect circle or anything. And then we're going to have another one that overlaps. So it's going to overlap it just a bit. It's going to look maybe just a touch larger. I'm just going to erase that little area where I drew on top of it. And then we're going to have a bigger one that'll start about here. So again, hold your pencil kind of high. It's just going to curve and wrap around this way. And in the middle of all of these, we're going to have this kind of abstract rounded blob. So that'll be the center part of the seed pod of these sunflowers. We'll have kind of another one that shows up here. And then with this flower, we're going to have some petals. So the key to drawing these flower petals is we're going to have curving lines and they're going to come to a point. Now, we're not going to just try and get this painting perfectly exact like what we're seeing in the Van Gogh painting. We're really just using the Van Gogh painting as a guide for the composition, meaning we're using it as a guide for how everything is set up. So we're going to use this painting as a guide and to help us set up to where we're going to put all the flowers and everything. Just going to squeeze another one in right there. Now we're going to have another flower kind of hanging out over here. So it's going to be like up in this upper section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the stem. So this is the green part in the painting. And then it's going to really kind of open up. And we'll then draw these kind of spiked, pointed shapes. So these are the green areas in the painting that you're seeing. And then what happens is we have the flower petals. So these spikes are like the leaves. And then we'll have more of these kind of abstract flower petals that looks like this one is about to wilt. These will overlap our flower pot just a bit. Put a little smaller one right there. So we'll have another flower that shows up right here. So this is the one that has like some light blue in the middle of it. So right about here. It kind of lines up with this center blob that we drew. We have another little stem. It's not going to be very long. And we'll have this kind of strange floating abstract shape. That'll be the blue area. From there, we will create these kind of curving petal lines. And so there's going to be quite a few on this flower. And they're just going to rotate around. So we have a little bit of radial symmetry, meaning our design just kind of radiates or rotates around a center point. Then pretty close to where this stem is, I'm going to have another flower stem that shows up. So sketch a longer line, and it may get overlapped a little bit by some of these petals that you drew. And where this one is going, it's then going to curve up just a touch. And then we'll have another seed pod, and part of the seed pod is going to run into your tape or to the border. Just going to connect my flower stem to that seed pod. And we'll have a little lone leaf at the bottom of the seed pod. And then we'll have some very small kind of spikes or small leaves at the top of that seed pod. So we'll just see, we'll go over this way for the next part. So kind of off to the side here, we're probably need to finish these flower petals. I didn't add all of them. We'll have this green leaf that kind of just shows up. So it's right on the side of the flower pot. And then we'll have another flower. We'll just kind of start it so it looks like it's floating. Just kind of like a half circle type shape. And then we're just going to have these kind of spiked leaves. They're all kind of curving down. And there'll be a little stem that comes off the bottom of it. This is going to create kind of a erase that when we do that line. So this is going to form what we'll just call like an S type shape. So it kind of looks like a distorted letter S. And we'll have another green leaf that overlaps that. Then we'll have another flower pod or seed pod that will be just above this. Look something like this. And this is going to have a lot of yellow petals. So many so that they're actually going to cover up what that leaf is connected to. So once you get the hang of drawing these petals, again, it's just starts off kind of wide, then comes to a point. So just kind of interpret these as you will. And from the bottom, we'll just have another flower stem. This kind of hooks around, and then it's just going to disappear into this seed pod. And then right behind this stem, this is where you're going to see that red seed pod, the seed pod that he painted red. Just going to hide that just a little bit. I have a collection of more petals. So this area of the painting is going to be really kind of chaotic. It's just going to be a lot of flower petals, a lot of these sharp lines. And then from here, we're just going to start making our way up. So we're going to have two stems that look like they kind of shoot out of the seed pod. One is a little bit thicker. The one next to it is just a little thinner. And they're both going to run into what looks like a fairly large seed pod. Have real kind of tiny petals that rotate around it. I'm not going to go all the way around. They'll just be in some random places. And we'll have the middle area. And we'll have another seed pod right next to it. So this one is actually going to look like it overlaps it a little bit once we get to the petals. Kind of like this black ring around the middle. Make some of these petals. I'm going to make them kind of longer. So with this painting, once we start adding the color, we're going to make it pretty abstract. So we're going to use several different techniques with this one. So you can see some of these petal lines, they're starting to overlap what I just drew. And we'll have some green petals underneath. So just gonna make those change directions just a little bit. Zoom out just a little. So we'll have another flower in this area. So just going to start with that seed pod shape. So it's really going to be directly above this one. Okay, go right up here. It's pretty much in line with this. And then the one underneath it. So it makes it pretty easy to find. Seed pod's a little bit smaller though. Smaller compared to this. Draw that dark area so it kind of looks like it's black. The petals, make these a little wider. This sunflower looks like it has quite a few petals that are overlapping one another. And we have some of those green leaves. These look fairly thin. And then the stem is just going to start right about here. We have a little bit of a curve to it. It's going to curve and then disappear behind the seed pod that is red. So just a few left. So we're going to have a large seed pod that is going to be partially hidden by this one. So I will start this about in the location of the center of this flower. Draw this around, wrap it around. Let's have a small green center, yellow green center. Put a few kind of like sharp lines at the top just to show some of the yellow petals. Do one right there. Do another little one right there. And after that, just going to have one really large one. It's going to be pretty close in size to this one now. And it's going to come up to, adjust my camera just a bit. That way we can zoom in. So it'll almost come up to the edge of your tape, but not quite. So we'll have just a little bit of space. So where this one is, it's just going to be a little bit offline with this flower. So if I go up, go over just a little bit, this is roughly where this one will fall. Give it kind of a small green center. And then the stem to this one is going to come down and just, it'll just really disappear into that flower. We'll put some shorter spikes around it. Again, these really small petals that don't quite show up. And now we have just one last flower. And this one's really odd. So it looks like it's wilting, and we're seeing it from the side. And so I'm going to start this. So we have kind of like this gap right here. It looks like all of our space is pretty well filled otherwise, but we do have this gap. And so that's where this flower will go. So I'm going to start with just kind of this kind of strange, thin shape, almost looks like a bean or something. And then the petals are going to point more downward. So the way in which we're drawing this sunflower is a lot different than some of the other ones. And we'll overlap. So after I drew this first round of petals, let's zoom in just a bit. Just really placing some in between now. Put maybe some right here. And they're so close together that we're not seeing too much of a stem. And actually in this painting, it looks like he did draw the stem. So let's zoom in pretty close so we get a better idea of this. So you probably can't see this on the original painting, but it looks like he drew the stem but accidentally painted it yellow instead of green. So I'm just going to make the stem, just kind of squeeze it in there. So that's this line right here. That way it doesn't look like the sunflower is just kind of hanging out on its own and floating in space. So after you have sketched all of this, fix my camera real fast. So after you've sketched out this entire image, our next step is we want to, sorry, adjust my camera. We're going to outline it all. So we're going to use ink that has color to it. In this case, the ink that has color, avoid black. So don't use black for an outline. So for mine, I think I'm going to use, maybe I'll use red. We'll see how that works. So let me go ahead and outline all of my pencil marks in color. Again, don't use black. We're going to add quite a bit of color to this one. If you want, you can even outline different parts with different colors. That has kind of a nice effect if that's something that you want to do. So every pencil mark you made, just go ahead and outline it. So unlike some of the other paintings that we will create, this will definitely have a more abstract feel to it, maybe even a little bit messy. But that's one characteristic of Van Gogh's paintings too. They weren't nice and neat and perfectly painted. He was painting really fast, you know, sometimes creating between 2 and 4 paintings a day. So to work at that type of rate, you've got to paint pretty quickly. And then one thing to watch out for while you are outlining your sunflowers is if you have lines that overlap, make sure that you're drawing or tracing over the lines that would be on top. So for example, over here, I have these red lines. This flower is in front, this flower is in the back. So I wouldn't want to trace around this entire circle. I would just trace over what I plan to see. Kind of like with the table right here, except I had erased out that table line. So when we're done tracing over everything, we will go through, erase all of our ink marks, or all of our, I'm sorry, pencil marks. That way we get rid of all the pencil and we just have this nice, very bright inked outline of the flowers. I'm just jumping around as I find everything. And I'm doing this pretty quick. I'm just kind of looking at the shapes I have, allowing my pen to follow those pencil marks. That way it kind of keeps that style that we're working with. And if you kind of slip up and don't trace over all the pencil perfectly, that's okay. And if you miss pencil, when you erase all the pencil on top of the pen, you'll probably see some gaps. So just know that you'll have to go back in and kind of fill those in with pencil and then the ink pen again. And so the pen I'm using is waterproof. So that's the key thing. Because we're working with watercolor, we want to make sure we have those waterproof ink pens that we have in the classroom. That way you don't have just a giant mess. So like if you're using Sharpie, that's not good because then the water will react with a Sharpie and you'll just have this giant kind of bleeding effect on the paper from a Sharpie pen. All right, looks like I have all of my marks made. So just take the eraser, go over the entire thing. We are. All right, so that's the first part, and that's simply drawing sunflowers. So the next video, part 2, will show some techniques for how you can add your color.